Hey, hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Aaron Martin, a writer and producer who's worked on shows like Degrassi, Being Erica, The Best Years, and Killjoys, and he's the creator of two current genre shows on your screens right now. The fourth season of Slasher, subtitled Flesh and Blood and starring David freaking Cronenberg, is rolling out on Hollywood Suite this month, and the second season of his space panic show Another Life, starring Katie Sackhoff as a veteran astronaut leading a mission to contact the alien intelligence that sent a mysterious artifact to our planet, just dropped on Netflix last week, and it's as goofy and disaster-ridden as the first one. You should check them out. They're a lot of fun. Aaron picked The Out-of-Towners, the Neil Simon scripted, Arthur Hiller directed 1970 comedy starring Jack Lemmon and Sandy Dennis as George and Gwen Kellerman, a nice suburban couple from Twin Oaks, Ohio, who are going to New York City for a dinner and a meeting to discuss George's promotion. That's their plan. Instead, they're plunged into a maelstrom of delays, diversions, and disasters designed to test the limits of their patience, their character, and maybe even their immune systems. Just remember, it's a comedy. It's okay to laugh at them. This is Someone Else's Movie.
I found myself going back, I think, for almost like comfort food, going to movies from the 70s and 60s. Even though, I was a child in the 70s, but it still reminds me of, being a kid and watching those silly movies. And this one's, the Out-of-Towners is one of my favorite from that era.
Well, when did you first see it? Did you see this as a kid? And what kind of an impact would it have on someone who imagines New York?
I think I saw it when I was maybe like 12 or 13. My sister and I watched it, and I think we might have rented it like from Blockbuster or something. And we both loved it because it's so, like, my sister and I've always loved ridiculous, over the top ridiculousness. And that movie is constant. It's like 90 minutes of that. And I was also, growing up in the 70s, the views of New York you had were when New York was scary. And so it just underlined my fear of that city.
Yeah, I can see that. Nadia Litz brought Clute onto the show like 5 years ago, and that was shot in, I think, 1969 and released in 1970, right around the same time as this. And there's this scene in a crack den, which I think is Washington Square Park now. It's like one of the wealthiest spots in the entire island. And there, it's just like, this is a monstrous, horrible place where nothing, like the Lower East Side is about to be reformed as Blank City. It just hasn't happened yet. But I was amazed rewatching it last night at how much open space there seems to be.
Yeah, it's weird. Yeah, it's like it doesn't feel like it almost feels. Yeah, it feels less dense than New York does now, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Part of that is, I guess, because they shot a lot of it in Central Park and Midtown, where things were still fairly low rise, and they just aren't anymore. But I don't think the Empire State Building factors in at all. And the World Trade Center was just starting to be constructed, but obviously you don't see it in that one shot of the island.
Yeah.
And of course, it takes 35 minutes for them to get to Manhattan?
Yeah. They're in an airplane and things go wrong. Yeah. Then they're in Boston and things go wrong. Then they're on a train and things go wrong. So yeah, it takes them a while to get into actual New York City.
Yeah. The cavalcade of misery. And I really noticed this time, I noticed the theatrical stuff, the way that Simon plays with repeating dialogue and echoing, and the way that Sandy Dennis is just basically, Gwen is just there to repeat whatever her husband says and sort of go along with it, and how much work Sandy Dennis is doing to sell that, which is so subtle that I missed it the first time around. It's like, oh, she's not doing anything. Oh, no, she's
so good.
She has a rich inner life of disappointment.
Yeah, and her "oh my God," which is repeated every time something horrible is about to happen.
Yeah,
I love her. She was so great in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf.
Yeah,
such a good actor.
And this was like the next year, I think, right? Like she would have shot this in 1969.
Yeah. And she must have been like in her 20s in this movie, right?
Well, according to this, she was at least 32.
Oh, okay. So it's not that big.
Born in 1937.
Yeah. So she was the year my dad was born.
Okay. And he was 45. That's not bad.
That's not bad.
And it's a decent, and I guess too, if it's a small town marriage, it's probably it tracks, and of course it always tracks older man, younger woman stuff in Hollywood filmmaking.
Yeah, it's such a. I just that movie's just fun. It's just so ridiculous for 90 minutes.
Yeah, I love the idea too that it is written by a New Yorker who is tired of people coming to town to visit him and complaining about everything. Like it's just so. When we were discussing the setup before we started recording, I mentioned that the fun of it is watching the city treat him like an infection. That he's anxious and can't go with the flow. And you know, I've never lived in New York. I should have done by now, but I've been there enough. Then it really does feel like home. And the thing that makes it feel like home to me is understanding that you just have to match its rhythms or it will consume you. And
I can never match its rhythms. I mean, I like big cities, but I don't like New York City. I like it for 2 days and then I need to get out of there. And I love big cities. Like I love London, I love Toronto, I love Berlin. It's just that New York, I can never like. I'm a weirdo who far prefers Los Angeles to New York City. I'd spend weeks in Los Angeles before I'd spend weeks in New York City.
Really, I love LA, but I love it in short doses. The longest I've ever spent there was 6 or 7 days, and that was great. But I felt like I was running out of things to go to do.
Yeah.
But
it's like one mall after another.
Yeah, and it's the size of it, right? The sprawl of LA just makes it impossible to feel like you live there unless you really do actively, constantly live there. But New York. My friend Gwen, who we were talking about before we were recording, she moved there in 94, I think, or 93. And her definition of the city is that it forces you to be your best self because it doesn't have any time for you if you're not.
And it's not that they're not rude. It's not that. It's just like it's that energy that's nonstop. Like you can't escape it.
Yeah, that's true. You need to be participating all the time. Situational awareness. Like people who are naturally introverted can hide in New York because you can go unnoticed.
Yeah.
But if you're involved with people and you're connecting, you make a habit of looking people in the eye, it's exhausting.
Yeah. Which is I think probably why I enjoy that movie now. I mean, the first time I enjoyed it because it was my sister and I watching it and finding it ridiculous. Now it's like that is pretty much my experience every time I go there. I have something horrible happens and I get sick of everybody and then I want to get out of there.
Yeah. Whereas I was thinking, every single thing that happens to these characters has happened to me at some point. It's just never all at once.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing. Also, I think it scratched the itch of the fact that I haven't been traveling for 2 years because of COVID. And I travel a lot. I love traveling. It's one of my favorite things. And to have not been in an airplane since I flew back from Vancouver when we were shooting the show. And that's the last time I was in a plane. And I really want to travel. And then I watched that and I remember all the horrors of traveling. Just getting on an airplane is so awful in so many ways.
Yeah, apparently it's worse now.
I can imagine.
The joke of the out-of-towners, of course, is that these people are simple in their desires. Like this is not a complicated quest. George and Gwen are going to New York for a weekend.
To have dinner.
At the Four Seasons. Oh, sorry. Yeah, the Four Seasons. They're staying at the Waldorf Astoria. They're having dinner at the Four Seasons.
Yeah.
And
he won't let her eat on the plane.
Yeah. And it's a fun controlling relationship that they have.
It's very weird. It's like now, and watching it now, you're like, he has to ask him if she can have a cup of coffee. It's like,
yeah.
I almost think that that's just how she survived her relationship with that guy because he's crazy.
Yeah. That's the thing about Dennis's performance this time. It's like, this isn't an abused person. This is a person who's bemused by her husband and has learned to go along to get along.
Yeah.
And all of her suggestions are entirely reasonable. Everything she says is reasonable. Even you were being held up. What did you want me to do? All the stuff that happens, she's the one who rolls with it. She's the Midwesterner who just takes it and goes with it.
Yeah.
And he transfers all of his anxiety onto her.
Yeah.
Over and over and over again. And I realized the thing that Jack Lemmon does best in this movie, and he does it like a sustained aria, is refuse to take responsibility. Right? Like anything.
No, he just has that list and he just keeps adding names to it.
Yeah, which is great too, because by the end of it, it's literally the only thing he has in his possession is there's a list of people he's going to kill.
Yeah, it's such a funny movie. Yeah, I remember once flying to New York from Toronto, and New York is, if there's a storm, you're screwed. Yep. And I once took, I think it was 5 hours waiting at Pearson for an hour-long flight, and it was just awful. And I had this weird experience with Allison Mack from the whatever she's been part of that weird cult, but
Nexium, yeah.
she was very rude to me, and so and I was seated beside somebody else that she wanted to sit beside, and instead of asking me nicely, she came up, she said, "You're going to move your seat." And I was like, "Okay, Allison Mack." I never.
That's such a. Do you think that's like the Nexium training of getting what you want by just stating it outright, or was this before that?
Before, so I think she might have.
So she's even younger. That's just not cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yet that is George's response to everything, right? You're going to do this for me because that's what I want.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true.
And watching, Billy D. Williams. That's Billy D. Williams. I was amazed. I'd forgotten completely that he'd done anything before, like Lady Sings the Blues.
Yeah.
But he's the baggage guy in Boston who's again quietly bemused and gives him his name, and none of it changes anything. And it's the first taste of the New York attitude that they're going to be confronted with. But he's just he is so good at just kind of putting a laugh into his delivery.
Yeah.
So we're in a comic mode rather than a frustration. Like I was really struck this time through a bunch of I think I hadn't seen it in probably, I'm going to guess 25 years. Like the last time I saw it was easily before the Goldie Hawn Steve Martin remake, which was just terrible.
Yeah.
And I just like the frantic pacing and the way Arthur Hiller kind of pitches everything is anxiety inducing.
Yeah.
And then the first thing that goes wrong, it's the stewardess with the coffee thing and just her casual refusal to play along, which I think is sort of the tribute that John Hughes built into Planes, Trains, and Automobiles with the car rental agent. It's the same thing. It's like, I'm going to stand on ceremony, not because I have to, but because you're pissing me off and I'm just not going along with it. And then Williams is so warm in his inability to help that it tilts all the way into comedy, right? Yeah. Because you could play this story straight and it's a horror movie. It's a movie about not going in the woods, except the woods are a concrete jungle.
Yeah. Well, everyone's trying to help them. That's why I think it works, because they are all legitimately trying to help them. Even that kind of snotty guy at the hotel, he's saying, like, I've got a room at 7 a.m. You can just sit there and wait, and then you'll have it. And he won't. And it's I think Sandy Dennis would have taken that, but
yeah, she says, let's just stay and drink coffee and wait for the room. And George is past that. He's a destroyed man, and somehow Lemmon makes this guy who is, what it is right now. You could remake this with Bryan Cranston and it would be either a comedy or a horror movie. Like it could be a thriller about the last day of this man's life, because he is going to walk into a sewer grate. Or the gas man actually would kill him.
Who would play Gail? Would it be Jennifer Lawrence?
Oh, honestly, I would want to go with Jennifer Lawrence would be really good, actually. No, I was thinking, when I was watching it, I was thinking the person that I would want would be somebody like Allison Hannigan. It's the wrong age bracket, but the right energy. Somebody who's just able to go, like she could be, we know that she's secretly just as weird as he is, but she's not showing it. Yeah. Somebody like that might be fun. Yeah. But Lawrence is good. Lawrence is great in anything. I would watch her do that.
That would be a bit of an age gap, though.
Yeah. Well, it would be with either of them, I suppose.
Yeah.
Who would be an age-appropriate mix for an age-appropriate match for Bryan Cranston in something like this?
I don't know. It must be younger actors who are intense but funny.
Allison Janney?
Oh, yeah.
They'd be fun together.
Yeah. I love Allison Janney. I was so sad that Mom got canceled.
Oh, was it? When did that happen?
A couple months ago.
Oh, I missed that. But there's a moment when Lemmon is yelling at the cabbie in Boston, there's a moment where I just saw Cranston instantly.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Frenzied, frustrated panic.
His cheap 25-cent tip that he was going to give him.
Yeah, and screaming addresses at each other. It's so weirdly rooted in its own, like it is absolutely driven by its own logic, which only the characters can understand. I would love to see how Neil Simon plotted this. Like, did he use a flow chart? Did he use notes? Did it all just burp out of him over a weekend when he was pissed at somebody who had been like taking up space on his couch and complaining about everything instead of actually going out and enjoying the city?
Yeah, and it wasn't originally a play, right? It was always in film. It was always a
It's his first film script. It's his first original screenplay. It still feels like it could be staged, especially after Plaza Suite, right? Like he's sort of already done that.
Yeah.
But his instincts for like rat-a-tat dialogue and back and forth stuff and echoing and mirroring, it works for film just as well.
Yeah. No, it's such, he's a very talented writer.
Yeah. And there's a sense too of like the sort of grand history of New York. Gwen describes it as an island off the coast of America, where it's just become its own society out of necessity more than anything else. And you can watch this if you are in the heartland. And I think you could feel completely justified in George's position. Like you could side, there is a way to side with him.
Yeah.
But I did not. And I enjoyed watching his destruction.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think I would be like him in this situation because I can get frustrated easily and I can express anger easily. So I might be like him, but yeah, I wasn't feeling his plight because he just kept making stupid decisions. But because Jack Lemmon's so good, you don't dislike him. You think you're along for it, and you want him to keep making stupid decisions.
Oh yeah, it's fun to watch him suffer, which is why like it's enjoyable as a comedy, because otherwise it would be just horrifying.
It could be like a horror. It would be like this. What was that movie with Goldie Hawn's husband? What's it?
Kurt Russell. Oh, Escape from New York.
Yeah, it could be Escape from New York. Yeah.
I think there's probably a Gwen and George wandering around somewhere in Escape from New York. They were there the day that they walled off the city, and now they're stuck.
So what was the remake like? Because I didn't see it.
Oh, it's bad. It's bad. Han and Martin had made House Sitter together. I want to say I know I did the junket for that in 1992. And 7 years later, Martin was directing. Well, he wasn't directing. He was making Bowfinger the same year. I think he basically just had a contract to honor somehow, and they both got roped into this remake. And it is just a soulless thing. It's pitched really high. It's got additional internal conflicts. Like they turn on each other, which is the one thing that, you can't do that in this story. They need to be a team.
Yeah.
Even if it is the way Gwen just sort of unconsciously enables George for her own amusement, I think, in the first half.
Snap at him. She does snap at him in Central Park, but even then she's snapping at him in a supportive way. Yeah,
she's trying to get him back on track. And she's already sustained. She's the one who gets physically injured. She steps on the flip top cap or something. And, now she has hepatitis. That's not good.
I know. Oh, imagine walking around New York City in the 70s or late 60s without shoes on. Yeah, it's a disturbing idea. John Hodgman talked about that in one of his books. He talks about the most freeing thing he did was shoot a promotional video for something, and he shot it barefoot. I think it might have been for his first book. Walking around Times Square, and he was braced for misery, and it turned out to be liberating and freeing. And I think it's because there's nothing has ever happened in Times Square that hasn't already happened. Yeah, like it's all recursive. I love Times Square. I love Times Square now because you get to watch people watch it, and they've got these steps, this over thing around 54th. And I sometimes will just sit there with a coffee for half an hour, and you can watch the entire world go by. There's someone from everywhere. And because it's Times Square, everybody moves. There's the natural flow to it since they pedestrianized it. And it's just, again, it's a space that didn't exist when they made this movie 50 years ago. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing that's so amazing is how different New York is. I mean, obviously every city changes over time, but like the shots of Central Park, it was garbage everywhere. The grass was brown and dead. And it was like Central Park at that time was scary. You didn't go to Central Park. And the first time I went to New York City, it was 96. Weirdly, I hadn't been to New York City. I've been a bunch of other places, but not New York. And even in 96, 95, 96, it was still sketchy. Like you were still like, what's the street parallel to Broadway that did have all the Triple X movie theaters? There's 8th Avenue. On the other side. They still have a few, like their DVD stores now. Yeah. In fact, that's the only place that DVD has survived. Yeah, really. But back then it was like still sketchy. And we stayed at the, what's the hotel? The Edison. and there was a fire when we were there. So it was, the first time I went to New York, it was quite. It was more in that world of the out of towners than the Disneyland that it is now, because it's just become so clean and so spruced up, and everybody who lives there has to be a multimillionaire.
Feels like it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's still possible or it was to have like an apartment in a brownstone on West 73rd for a reasonable amount of money, but it was a tiny space.
Yeah.
And nobody, you just, your apartment is for sleeping and showering. There's no other purpose. You can't actually live there. You have to go out and live in the city.
Yeah.
It's always been like that, I think. And since the 80s anyway, since people started returning to Manhattan.
Yeah.
But there's this window of time where all these movies were shot on location because it was cheap. there was nothing to do around there. So you could just shoot in burned out vacant lots. You could make entire chunks of Clute, and you could shoot the French Connection with handheld cameras on 42nd Street. And this has like those scenes in outside the Waldorf Astoria, that Automat, those are all real locations. It's not studio. It's not staged.
No, it's all, I wonder if did they actually shoot in Boston, or did they make New York look like Boston? That was the only thing I was questioning.
Yeah, I wonder. The credits aren't comprehensive enough to have locations listed or anything. It would make sense if they shot it in Boston. You could do it in 2 days. It wouldn't be that hard, and it's close. But you could also probably have faked it. I mean, there must have been standing train station sets in the 60s. There must have been something in Brooklyn or in the Bronx, but
it didn't look like downtown Manhattan.
Yeah, but those shots of the Waldorf Astoria, they shot in the Waldorf Astoria. I've been there. It's eerie to see that the architecture hasn't changed. I was there I stayed there one night in like 2012, I think. And those rooms do look like half finished apartment suites. The architecture of that hotel, once you get onto the room floors, onto the sleeping floors, instead of the grand lobbies, the rooms can be kind of punky, and they clearly used one. It's remarkable how detailed it is. And that the Waldorf Astoria, I suppose they didn't have the concerns of having their image ruined in 1970. It's the Waldorf. Everybody knows the Waldorf. But their people are helpful. The staff are presented as competent and well-meaning.
Well, it's also his fault that he didn't keep the reservation, as everyone keeps telling him, including the cop. He's like, yes, it's just everything really is his own fault.
Yeah.
Well, not the airplane being delayed, but he did book it too late.
He says late in the film, I could have taken an earlier flight. It's like, actually, you're right. You could have. Everybody knows not to fly into LaGuardia after 2 p.m. They were going to JFK, but even so, the experience, and that's something else that keeps coming back in the New York movies, the truly great New York movies. They understand the ecosystem of the city. Yeah. There's one way in, there's one way out. You really cannot push against the flow.
No.
And by demanding special treatment at every turn, and just like that casual arrogance of buying a New Yorker at the Ohio airport to seem urbane, you buy it at the Hudson News on your way in. Don't be a rube. It's so it's like that's the rite of passage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then at the end, they wisely decide not to move to New York.
Yeah, which is it's true. It saves their marriage, but I still think he should have committed. I think there's a better ending where it's just like, fuck this city, I'm going to beat it and doom them like forever to this cycle.
Well, it looks like at the end of the movie though, they're going to Havana. So
yeah, if they don't go home, you don't have that ending, which is of course invaluable. But it is just such a fun, perfect ending to the resignation that you never leave the Twilight Zone. You're already there.
And then he won't let her eat dinner again. He's so controlling. It's ridiculous.
It's all he has left.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of other New York movies obviously all the Woody Allen movies, they all get it right, even though Woody Allen.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? Like it's such a specific vision of New York as well, where everybody has money, nobody really works. Like his attempts to depict working class life or any other class of life in New York are never his best. And of course now the power dynamics are problematic. Everything is problematic about a Woody Allen film in retrospect, but there are, I think you could probably build a syllabus for a university film theory class about the lie of New York City, or the mythology of New York City that's being sold in Woody Allen movies.
Yeah.
Which Neil Simon clearly has no interest in. I mean, Woody Allen hadn't made those movies yet, but this is the counter to that. This is everything is awful. You learn to accept the awful, and that's what you love about it. It's like New York is a rescue dog that like it's missing a leg and one of its ears is on backwards, and it's still the best dog you'll ever own because it gets you right back. Yeah.
Oh, imagine! I don't think Jack Lemmon's character had a dog.
No, they do have a dog.
Oh, they do. That's right. That comes out at the top of the movie.
Yeah, there's this shot. It's a long shot, that helicopter shot of a white dog that is clearly not barking, even though there is barking on the soundtrack.
Yeah. And is that like their nanny that's out there too, or
I assume, or whoever's watching the kids?
Yeah.
But yeah, they're not hurting. Right. They're a very, very comfortable suburban family. They will not have a chance in New York City. Like the kids will grow up to be poets and dancers.
Yeah.
But the city will eat them. And maybe that's part of it too. When Neil Simon was writing plays about New York, he was dealing with artists and libertines and people who were just falling in and out of bed with each other, or The Odd Couple, which was the great urban misery comedy.
Yeah,
of the 60s.
Yeah, that's another movie that I went back to. It was that I went. What else did I watch? I watched Rosemary's Baby again.
That holds up.
That really holds up. It's really disturbing.
Yeah, it's probably the ultimate patriarchy movie now. Like if you want to point to something and say this is the metaphor.
Yeah, really, for sure.
Yeah, Alana Harkin and Jeremy Lalonde did it on an episode of Black Hole Films couple of months ago, and it's great to listen to it because Alana had never seen it, and you can just hear all of her illusions being shattered of what she thought it was going to be versus what it actually is, and she's angry with it, which is great. It's such a great way into that movie. But in the history of Neil Simon New York cinema, The Odd Couple, I keep forgetting The Odd Couple is his, and Lemmon and Matho, right? Lemmon had already done this definitive Simon work.
But that's all sets though. They don't. There's no that. I mean, that one really feels like the play that it was when you watch it. It's like this is a play. They didn't do it. They really didn't change much to make it a movie that I can see.
No, and I think they didn't want to. Like, it felt like a really conscious decision to leave it alone because. Yeah, and that's in the 60s too. People didn't open up plays as a rule. Like it wasn't necessary. It was giving the audience the experience of the thing that they couldn't come to New York to see. Like Barefoot in the Park is another. That was a Simon, wasn't it? That's one of his. Robert Redford and Jane Fonda. Yeah, who are perfectly suited to it. Like weirdly, in that 60s perfection thing, like these two human specimens together is enough to watch a movie.
Yeah, you're like, I want to watch those pretty people.
Yeah.
So that was my pandemic's been watching movies from the 70s and 60s. It's been fun.
Any discoveries? Is there anything you'd want to recommend to people?
Anything. It's actually funny. I also went back to the 50s. I was watching a bunch of Douglas Sirk movies.
Oh yeah.
And what's the one with Rock Hudson, and it's the one that Far From Heaven basically ripped off. It's just, I mean, the movie's as all, it's so melodramatic and over the top, but so beautifully filmed. And going into season 4 of Slasher, my serial killer show, it was, I just watched it and I said to the team, I was like, let's make this season look like a Douglas Sirk movie. So that was one of the things that came out of the pandemic for me too. It's making a Sirkian horror.
I just, it hadn't even occurred to me. There is a lushness, isn't there? And the family drama, like the sense of a cloistered space where people are just trapped with each other.
The weird out of time that we put into it and stuff. So yeah.
Is there anything that influenced the second season of Another Life, which was in production before the pandemic, but even so?
No, it was no, because it was we just basically took what we did in season 1 and then refined it and listened to some of the critiques and address them, and I'm really happy with it. It's a much more serious season than season 1 was.
Okay, having not seen season 2 yet, because they only just gave me the screeners, I don't want any spoilers and I don't want anything ruined for me, but I kind of love the fun of one, like the sense of this random chaos and disaster happening every week where something else would go disaster. Like there's
still that. There's still that. It's
okay, good.
There's not, I mean, I think that where we did missteps was the fact that these people were supposed to be, professional. And we leaned in too much into the interpersonal stuff. And, I come from a land of 20 years of doing soapy shows, and it just had to pull that back a bit.
Okay. I do feel, though, that the thing that's always missing in the depiction of long-term space travel, even stuff set on the ISS, you would get on each other's nerves. Like you would. You're isolated from literally everything with a handful of people that you only know professionally.
Yeah.
It's going to get weird.
It's just that I feel like we found a better balance of that stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I don't want to know anything else, but
No.
is there, well, the final question on the podcast is always, is there something of this movie? Is there something of the Out of Towners that you've borrowed or lifted or pulled or stolen? Is there, like, if you were given the opportunity, how would you work it in? Or where would you put it? I mean, ultimately, Another Life is about people on a trip who can't get where they want to go, but I think that's a stretch.
That's a bit of a stretch. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure if there's anything. I feel like I was watching these movies more, except for maybe the Cirque stuff, more just as an escape from the drudgery of being stuck in my house. And I'd kind of run out of TV series that I wanted to watch. And so I was kind of finding it hard to like watch something sustained for multiple episodes of this. This was early on in the pandemic. And so that's why movies, and I kept finding fun 70s movies, just were like a comfort blanket for me.
Yeah, I can see it.
This one's this one is one of the biggest comfort blankets for me. And Agatha Christie novels, I went back and reread basically all of them.
Oh, wow.
Reverted into my weird, preteen self.
Yeah. Jason Mantzoukas was just saying that on an episode of Andy Richter's podcast, that he has spent, if he looks back at the pandemic year that he had, I don't know when they recorded it, but it was in the spring of this year. He says if he looks back, he sees himself watching TV, rewatching, like he rewatched all of Deadwood, he rewatched all the Fargos, he read comic books, and he played games, and he was like if he could have told his 15-year-old self that he would do this for a full year, he would have been the happiest person in the world. Yeah.
And we should be so lucky that that's how we got to spend the pandemic, because it's been so much harder for other people. But, it's just so weird.
Yeah. I mean, everybody's accruing trauma, like I keep saying. But I saw a movie in a theater with a lot of people today, and I only wanted to punch a couple of them. So I think I'm making it through. My thanks to Aaron Martin, whose chaotic sensibility is on full view in the second season of Another Life, now streaming on Netflix, and the fourth season of Slasher is also out, streaming on Shudder in the US and Hollywood Suite in Canada. Are you watching them? You should be watching them. You can find Aaron on Twitter at Aaron S. Martin, all one word, and you can find The Out of Towners on DVD from Paramount Home Entertainment. It's also streaming on the Criterion channel right now, and available on most VOD platforms. Please don't bother with the remake, it will only make you sad. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner, and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com, where I host the Now What podcast every Friday, and try to keep up with the fall festival wave. And you can find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, SEMcast, and wherever you get your podcasts. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it, or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been enjoying us. Every little bit helps, it truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're there. Watch movies, stay safe, wear a mask if you go out, get your shot already. I'll see you next time.